Hi guys, and welcome to Magic. This video tutorial is accompanied by an article. If you prefer to read tutorials like this in the forms of article or written words, there is a link in the description of this YouTube video to where you can find the article. In this tutorial, what we are going to do, we are going to look a little bit about how the generator in Magic works. How can the generator create CRUD HTTP REST points? With the generator, of course, I mean this guy here, this menu item here. However, before we can actually start using the generator, we're going to need an example database. So if you click the SQL menu item here and then you choose load, then you will find a bunch of database scripts. I'm going to be using Babelfish here. However, if you are using SQL Server as your primary default database engine, you can find another script and you can still follow this tutorial by using this other script, and this other script is called Northwind Simplified. It's basically a simplified version of Microsoft's Northwind database. However, I'm going to choose Babelfish here. Click that script, and then you can see that this is obviously an SQL create database schema SQL file. This particular file happens to create two tables, languages and translations. When I click the execute button down here, poof, I have a new database. But before I can actually retrieve this database, I now have to go back to the menu and choose diagnostics and choose cache and make sure I delete my MySQL.generic cache key here. The reasons for that is because retrieving metadata from your database is quite expensive from a CPU perspective, so Magic caches this on the server side. This is, by the way, your cache on the server side of Magic. You can also just clear all items if you want to, it doesn't really matter. Then we can go back to the generator. Then we can choose databases, and at this point you will see you have a Babelfish database. Choose Babelfish, click Crudify all tables, and that's it. At this point, Magic generated 350 lines of code for me automatically. All of this code can be found inside of a folder on my file system. And in fact, already at this point, you can click Magic here to toggle the menu. Then you can click Files. Then you can click Modules to expand the Modules folder. And you will now then see you have one additional folder here in your backend file system. Mine is Babelfish because I created the Babelfish database. If you created the Northwind Simplified, you will have a Northwind Simplified folder. I'm going to expand Babelfish here. And as you can see, here I have 10 files, Hyperlambda. Now these files have a specific structure. For instance, if I look at languages here now, you will see that I have languages.get.hl, languages.post.hl, languages.put.hl. In addition to that, I have languages-count.get.hl. The last parts of my files, .hl here, implies it's a Hyperlambda file. The part before that is the HTTP verb. And the part before that becomes my endpoint's relative URL. So if I now go back to my endpoints here, or go to my endpoints, sorry, not back, and then I filter on Babelfish, you will actually see that I have one HTTP REST endpoint that basically maps to my Hyperlambda file within my modules folder. And in fact, if I choose, for instance, my languages get HTTP REST endpoint here, I can already invoke it. And the endpoint returns JSON array containing my languages. And I can do the same with post. I can create a new language. I can do fi, language finish. Then I can click invoke. You can see that I have a result of success. I can now go back up to my get endpoint again. Can invoke it once more, at which point I now have finish. And I can do the same with the put endpoint to update existing items. Now if I go to my files menu item here, I open up the modules folder and my Babelfish module or Babelfish folder, and I click languages.get.hl, and then I can hold down the Alt key on Windows or Option on Mac as I click M for maximize. Then I can actually see the code that Magic generated. There's a UI bug here, sorry about that. Let me just demaximize it. And here you can see what it does. Its most crucial part is data.connect here. This created a database connection for me towards my Babelfish database that should exist someplace within my database server that is referenced in my connection string in my app settings file called generic. And in fact, I can go to, if I open up the configuration in a different tab here, I can actually see that I have a generic connection string here inside of the MySQL connection strings. You can, of course, add as many connection strings as you want to here. I could, for instance, add another one beneath here if I wanted to, and call this one non-generic if I wanted to, or whatever, at which point I could connect to that connection to that database instance using non-generic. I'm not going to do that now, so I'm not going to save this file. However, further down, after it connects, you see everything from line 36 and all the way down to line 56 here is actually a Lambda object, or an argument, if you wish, to my data.connect invocation. And for the record, these guys here that are blue, they're called slots internally in Magic. That's the name of them. So all of this code here becomes an argument to my connect invocation. And basically what the data.connect slot does is that it basically just executes my code as if it was an argument. And of course, the most important part down here is the data.read part, which actually takes its arguments, transpiles these arguments into valid SQL, executes it towards my database type, meaning it will generate MySQL or SQL Server, SQL syntax, depending upon which database type I choose, and executes it towards my previously open database connection. Now, what the other parts up here does here, this part simply moves my arguments from my input arguments to my endpoint, and basically just applies my arguments from up here into my data.read invocation to the point in that invocation where the arguments belong. For instance, you see here at line 54, you see where, and then you see and. Well, if I go back to my endpoint now, and I choose the Babelfish languages get, if I add an argument, for instance, limit, or limit is a bad example, let me find another one, local like f and then %, and I add that argument and then I invoke it, then This becomes an argument inside of my where/end node to my data.read slot invocation. And you will see a similar structure in every single file you have. As I previously mentioned, there are 10 files here because Magic generates 5 files for every single database table you have. So if I now look at languages.delete.hl, which obviously deletes a language item, you will see similar logic here as it does invoke data.connect, then it invokes data.delete, which is another slot in Magic, which instead of course, retrieving items, deletes items from my database. I can also see similar logic in languages.post, which creates my items. Here it connects to a database, then it creates an item here. And the same for put. It connects to a database, then it updates an item. So this structure is the same for every single database table you have that you choose to CRUDify as you use the generator of Magic. And then you will see at the bottom here, it returns some data back to the client, which is automatically parsed and transformed into valid JSON, resulting in that you have an HTTP REST web API. So this is basically what Magic internally does. And actually, you can change all of this as you see fit. For instance, let's find languages.get.hl here. Here you can see it declares which arguments the endpoint can actually handle. Well, if I edit this, right, I can do like this, then I can save my file, then I can go back to my endpoints, then I can find Babel fish, then I can find languages get. You will see that I now have significantly fewer arguments I can actually pass into my HTTP REST endpoint. And I can also add arguments as I see fit. So the point being that what Magic generates for you, you should kind of like perceive it as a template, which you can edit as you see fit. Probably one of the more interesting things to edit, which you'd probably like to edit after Magic has done its thing, is to change the authorization requirements for Magic, which you can do in the invocation to auth.ticket.verify. What this slot invocation does, it basically passes in a comma-separated list of roles, and if the current client invoking the endpoint is not authenticated, having a valid JWT token belonging to either the root role or the admin role, then this invocation will throw an exception. And actually you can see that if you go back to your endpoints, filter on Babel fish, you find languages get, and then you copy its full invocation URL up in the right corner here, and then you open up an incognito Google Chrome browser window, important. Then you paste in the URL, you click carriage return, you will see access denied. Why? Because my endpoint requires authorization and authentication. And in fact, just for fun, let's change that by simply removing this little invocation here to auth.ticket.verify, save our file, and refresh our incognito browser window, at which point all the languages are returned. So this is basically how the generator of Magic is capable of automatically creating your HTTP REST Hyperlambda based backend. This is kind of like its internals of its input. In later videos I might go through how it actually does its job, but for now, thank you for watching. And yet again, there's a link in the description of this YouTube video to a place where you can actually read the article accompanying this particular YouTube video. And there's also a link in the description of where you can download Magic. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.